Welcome back to Face the Nation. Ceasefire negotiations between Israel and Hamas are underway again today in Cairo as the conflict nears the 6-month mark. In Jerusalem, Easter traditionally draws large crowds. Celebrations are muted this year because of the war. CBS News senior foreign correspondent Holly Williams is there.
In the Church of the Holy Sepulchre this morning, where many Christians believe Jesus was buried, they celebrated his resurrection. Easter's a time of hope for Christians, even with the Holy Land in the grip of war. Jerusalem is a contested city, claimed as a capital by both Israelis and Palestinians. Now members of the tiny Christian minority, around 15,000 believers, say they're under attack. There's been a spike in assaults by ultra-Orthodox Jews, including spitting at Christians and even desecrating this graveyard.
We have here the hotel, it's named Casanova.
Alessandro Salama is a Palestinian Christian who showed us around Jerusalem's ancient Christian quarter.
It's a difficult time for Christians in Jerusalem.
Yeah, it's really difficult because you see it's no people, no pilgrim. The situation here is so bad.
Around 1,000 Christians live in the Gaza Strip, where they're hoping simply to stay alive. Many have taken shelter inside churches in Gaza, praying for protection. But one church compound was hit by an Israeli airstrike in October, killing at least 18. In Tel Aviv last night, anti-government protesters filled the streets near Israel's Ministry of Defense, angry at Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's failure to bring the remaining hostages home. By some counts, these were the biggest demonstrations against Netanyahu's government since the war began.
Ships carrying more than 300 tons of food aid headed to Gaza yesterday. And Ed, this past week, the International Court of Justice ordered Israel to allow the unhindered access of humanitarian aid into the Gaza Strip, saying that famine is, quote, setting in there.
Our thanks to Holly Williams reporting from Jerusalem. One of the international aid groups working to get relief into Gaza is the World Food Program. And on Friday, we asked its executive director, Cindy McCain, what needs to change on the ground so her teams can operate there.
We need access. We need full, unfettered access. And right now, we don't have that. We can occasionally get a few trucks in. We can occasionally get up all the way to the north, but it's not consistent and it is not to scale either. All of the other issues regarding maritime and airdrops and all those are all good. We need any way to be able to get food in any way we can, but they can't take it to scale. We really need access to the road, and we need to be able to get up to the north all the way without being caught at checkpoints and turned around.
I read the World Food Program estimates simply addressing the basic food needs will require at least 300 trucks to enter Gaza every day and distribute food, especially in the north, as you mentioned. But you've only managed to get about 9 convoys of trucks in since the start of the year. That's nothing, right?
It's nothing. It really is. We were able to yesterday, or today, I guess it was, get 9 trucks in, period. We also were part of an airdrop today that was 6.1 metric tons. That's nothing. We just cannot continue this way. As you know, famine is imminent in the north. And so unless we can really convince our diplomatic groups and our political groups around the world to help convince the Israelis that we must get in and we must do it in a sustained and unfettered way, we can't. People are going to die otherwise, and they already are dying.
When you or your colleagues speak with Israeli officials about getting that access, what is the reason they're giving you why they're not letting you in? Do they not understand the situation, or is there some other reason?
Well, I'm not really sure where the mistake has been made, but I do know that there's been accusations that somehow the UN isn't doing their job, which couldn't be further from the truth. So I think, again, it's politics. I think it's something that various factions are involved in. All I need to know is when and where we can take the food in, make sure that we can distribute it. That's what I want to know from the Israeli government.
You're especially concerned as well about what's happening in parts of Africa, specifically Sudan, South Sudan, and Chad. And you've said this could become the world's largest hunger crisis. Why is that?
Well, quite frankly, it's the forgotten crisis now. Sudan is no longer paid attention to in the world media, and things haven't stopped there. People are still fighting. There is no food. We have no access, and we're also fighting a climate change issue there as well. So it's almost a combination of a perfect storm with 2.2 million refugees across the borders in various countries, especially Chad, and the funding sources that we have right now and our ability to be able to fund, it just isn't meshing. We don't have enough money, and we need to be able to make sure that we can feed the refugees that are across the border and also get access into Sudan from the western side, the southern side through South Sudan and through the north. We've got to get food in there as well, because it can be and will be, I hope not, I pray not, the next largest humanitarian crisis that we will know.
And not only a humanitarian crisis, you've suggested it could be a real national security risk for the United States, right?
Very much so. People migrate. The bad guys get mixed up in all of this. Food is the major element here in being able to keep populations stable and keep them healthy as well. With those two things not tended to, then people migrate, they run, they take their families, they do anything they can to feed their families.
You've made an interesting point that I think is a good reminder to all of us that these hunger crises around the world are not being caused by natural disasters, but by man-made events and conflict. And nowhere right now, perhaps at least in this hemisphere where we sit, is that most apparent than in Haiti. What is the situation there as you understand it?
It's catastrophic. We WFP are still in there, and we still are working in the north somewhat and somewhat down towards the center. But it is a very dicey situation. We are continuing our school feeding programs, but once again, as you've seen, there have been evacuations of UN personnel out of there. It's just, again, this is a diplomatic solution. This is a man-made crisis, and we need a diplomatic solution to it. And we need it now. We need it right now.
You know, we'd be remiss if we didn't ask you while we have you about the death of the late Senator Joe Lieberman, who, of course, was such a good friend to you and to your late husband. What did he mean to the McCain family?
Oh, he was Uncle Joe to my children. He was a friend to my family. And I had the extreme opportunity of watching two men together not only navigate the difficulties that the world offered up to them as in what they did, but also watch them solve problems together in a way that was gracious and kind and loving towards humanity. And I had the good fortune of being able to call him my friend, too.
Executive Director Cindy McCain of the World Food Program, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
And we'll be right back. On this Easter Sunday, we thought today might be a good opportunity to reflect a bit on faith in America, especially given all the trouble the world is facing. We spoke on Thursday with the Catholic Archbishop of Washington, Wilton Cardinal Gregory, and the Episcopal Bishop of Washington, the Right Reverend Marian Budde. And we began by asking them how they counsel parishioners through these tough times.
I would say that we are part of a broad Christian faith that encourages us to trust and to believe that fundamentally our God is a God of love, and that God, the source of all that is good in the world, is with us. And that doesn't negate or soften the reality of the struggles that we face and certainly the difficulties of the world. And in fact, the witness of Jesus would say, no, go to those places, be present, be open, and trust that the worst that happens isn't the final word.
One of the things that I try to remind our people of is that in spite of the difficulties that we are currently facing, and they are serious and they are deep, but they are not the way that God intended his creation. In the book of Genesis, repeatedly, it says that God, after creating the heavens, the earth, he looked at it and he saw it was good. That's the statement that we need to remind our people of, that God's creation is fundamentally good, flawed by sin, flawed by our hatred and violence, but still substantially a good creation.
Got to be hard for people to appreciate that or to be reminded of that, whether they're dealing with something personal or they're seeing what's happening in their communities or in the world. And certainly there is plenty of good that goes on, but there's...
It requires practice and discipline to focus on goodness and to be a source of goodness. It's not hard to be negative. It's not hard to be even cynical about the world. That's actually really easy to do. People of faith are called to a higher, are called to set our gaze higher and to be those who are not only looking for good, but actively trying to promote it.
It's been 4 years since essentially the world locked down in the midst of the pandemic.
Yes.
And that's when the two of you really began to do a lot of your work together. You're no strangers to each other.
Right.
We
met the weekend before everything shut down.
We got in just under the wire.
And like many others, we're able to maintain your relationship, but from a distance, of course. How are we doing spiritually in the 4 years since that began?
There's an uptick in church attendance. Now, we didn't begin with a robust assembly to begin with, but we are watching the numbers return. The one cohort that I'm concerned about, two cohorts really, would be our elderly who are still somewhat hesitant to come out, but the outreach to our young adults. Our young people are not approaching organized religion with the same value structure that their parents and their grandparents had. So we've got to do more to draw that. We've got to market the church.
A couple of things are truly striking. I think the rise of mental health concerns across the country, regardless of religion or affiliation, and the sheer numbers. I was listening to someone who was working in the criminal justice system here in the district saying that there's a direct correlation with the rise of youth violence and crime that we're seeing with the dislocation that young people experienced during the pandemic when there was just nothing for them. I also feel that perhaps some of the polarization that we experience as a country was exacerbated by that. And so to the degree that we can be instruments of healing and of friendship and goodwill across the country, I feel like Christians are at our best when we do that.
If we can model for the world, not just for the young people, but if we can model for all people that it is possible to have friendships, relationships, and personal affection for people that you have differences with, that's a wonderful gesture of what we are really called, certainly as people of faith, to live and to engage in.
And with the rising numbers of, as we see it all across the country, anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, just the concern, I mean, just if the interfaith community, the leaders and the churches and the mosques and the synagogues, if we can remember our friendships with one another and stand with one another in these times, we can do a lot. We can do a lot to bring that caustic energy down.
The two major candidates we have running for president invoke Christianity. I know this gets a little tricky, but we have one who is now selling Bibles that also have copies of the Constitution and the Bill of Rights in them. But the other is the second Catholic president who goes to church every Sunday, who observes the holy days of obligation and builds his schedule around them, but doesn't talk at all publicly and is uncomfortable speaking about his own faith. Are you comfortable with the role and the level of Christianity in our politics today?
Whereas faith used to be the voice, the moral voice that political people, whether they adhered to everything, they would turn to find the moral compass with faith. I think in some cases, it's the political world that's beginning to set or claiming to set the moral voice. We've switched position. There is a great need, I believe, to place faith in its proper position which is not necessarily antagonistic to the political arena, but to seize the responsibility of being that guiding principle, that moral light for our people to turn to.
I'm very concerned about the way the message of Christianity is being distorted in our country right now. I think it's a cause for deep concern. I feel it's an abuse of the faith, and I have to be very careful because I'm not perfect in my understanding of what it means, to be a perfect Christian. I'm not a perfect Christian and I'm not a perfect American, but I think we are walking on very thin ice now. I would encourage anyone who buys a Bible to read the Bible, and in particular to read the teachings of Jesus, and then to set our policies, if we're going to call ourselves a Christian nation, against the highest aspirations that Jesus calls us to.
In the case of the president, do you get a sense that his regular attendance and adherence to the faith resonates with American Catholics?
I would say that he's very sincere about his faith, but like a number of Catholics, he picks and chooses dimensions of the faith to highlight while ignoring or even contradicting other parts. There is a phrase that we have used in the past, a cafeteria Catholic. You choose that which is attractive and dismiss that which is challenging.
Or, as Thomas Aquinas would say, you allow your conscience to guide you. Right?
Is there something on the menu he's not ordering, in your view?
Well,
so to speak?
I would say there are things, especially in terms of the life issues, there are things that he chooses to ignore, or he uses the current situation as a political pawn rather than saying, look, my church believes this.
It's also possible to be a practitioner of the faith as a public leader and not require everyone that you lead in your country to be guided by all of the precepts of your faith, right?
And in my coverage of him, it seems
that's
what he believes.
That's what I would interpret.
Your concern is that he should be more explicit in his own personal belief, which is a personal opposition to abortion, but an understanding that as a public leader and in a free society, he's not to be placing that on everybody else.
He's not to place that on everybody else.
Right.
I'll just say that I worship with the president when he comes to Washington National Cathedral, and I will say the one thing about him that I admire tremendously, there is not a funeral of a statesperson or a statesperson's spouse that he does not attend, stay through the entire service, and speak from the pulpit as in eulogy. And I find that example to be an expression of authentic faith.
Is there any Biden effect in the pews, perhaps?
I would not put a lot of emphasis on that.
Okay.
He does attend church regularly with great, devotion. But he also steps aside some of the hot button issues, or uses the hot button issues as a political tool, which it's not the way I think we would want our faith to be used. The issues of life begin at the very beginning, and they conclude at natural death. And you can't pick and choose. You're either one who respects life in all of its dimensions, or you have to step aside and say, I'm not pro-life. I'm, in one side of the equation, I feel that I can support this dimension of life, but in others, I would step aside.
I love the spectrum of life. I think you can be an adherent of the spectrum of life and still respect a woman's right to choose her in reproductive health, and including when to have an abortion in the early stages of pregnancy. So I'll just say that as a Christian, I believe that that's possible, and still hold to the full spectrum of life.
We know in the case of the president, he communicates occasionally with the Holy Father, with the Pope. Do you get any sense that the Pope conveys your frustrations to the president?
I would not be at all surprised to have Pope Francis have had the opportunity to speak directly to the president regarding that. One of the things that I think Pope Francis does, and does extraordinarily well, is that he engages people. This past week, Pope Francis met with 2 different fathers, one Palestinian and one Jewish, both of whom had lost a daughter during this conflict. And what was absolutely marvelous was, rather than turn against each other, they decided, with God's grace, to say that this experience of pain that they both had suffered brought them together rather than drove them apart.
And that's a resurrection story right there.
Yes.
Yeah.
Archbishop of Washington, Wilton Cardinal Gregory, Episcopal Bishop of Washington, the Right Reverend Marian Budde.
Thank you.
This was fantastic. Thank you so much for spending some time with us. Let's do it again.
Thank you.
And happy Easter.
Thank you.
Happy Easter,
Happy Easter to you. And to you.
Happy Easter,
And to
my dear
you.
friend.
And we'll be right back. You can see our full conversation with Cardinal Gregory and Bishop Budde on our website and YouTube channel. Just search for Face the Nation. That's it for today. Thank you so much for watching on this Easter Sunday. Margaret will be back next week for Face the Nation. I'm Ed O'Keefe.